Hello and welcome to this episode of India and the World on DeKoder. I'm Nidhi Razdan. Well, it's been quite a crazy few weeks in India, hasn't it? With the Cockroach Janata Party's protests against the government and the education minister, which, in a very rare move for the Modi government, actually forced the education minister to step down. Now, it's not the first time that the Modi government has backed down when it has come under pressure and faced protests. That happened during the Land Acquisition Act. It happened when the farm laws were repealed, and now with these protests. But what made these protests different from all the others that have taken place earlier is the fact that it cut across caste and religious lines. And it's something that wasn't just confined to a part of the country, to Delhi's borders or a part of the capital. It's something that reverberated not just in Delhi, but in other major cities in India as well. And that's why the implications and the fallout of this is significant politically in the short term as well as the long term. And it's a story that didn't just make headlines in India, of course, but around the world as well. Not just because the protests were taking place, but because of the way the government has reacted, the way the police acted against students. And even today, we continue to see the kind of action that is being taken against those who protested, whether it's been cases filed against them, social media posts that are being taken down, etc. The protest also saw a huge debate about the role of the mainstream media in India, what my former colleague Ravish Kumar once called the Godi media. And there are so many issues that have cropped up that have made, as I said, international headlines. I'm happy to have join us today, Helle Lyng. She's the Norwegian journalist who I think is now very well known across India because she did something a couple of months ago that very few Indian journalists, or perhaps none, have been able to do in more than a decade, which is to try and ask the Prime Minister a question when he was visiting Norway. And boy, did she sort of hit the headlines here for that. But Helle Lyng, thank you very much for joining us from Oslo today. Just to get your perspective, you are a Gen Zer yourself. How has this story played out in the media there, and the kind of attention it got?
I think it was really like last week that media in Norway started covering this protest. So it was sort of, as I would say, probably in general, when it comes to news in India, that we kind of neglect them over here. But then when something dramatic happens, then you first really start to see more reports coming in. Also here in Norway and other countries in north of Europe and across our continent.
And what was the coverage? What was the tone of the coverage in terms of the angles that were covered? I saw, in fact, that much of the international press, whether it was in England or in the US, also, it was actually a lead story in many publications.
Oh yes, I will say that I think it was definitely not a lead story here in Norway. But it was definitely a story that was on the front pages. But it's more so that, like in Norway, usually like a lead story is at the top of the pages. I would say this is probably more of a second page or second scroll story. But that was before the education minister had to resign, and then it became a lead story. But and the last week it was more covered as the students are hitting the streets in India. This is the Cockroach Yanta party.
So, I mean, in terms of the kind of coverage the media has given to this story, for India especially, promoting our democracy, our democratic values, Mahatma Gandhi, that's been actually at the core of our diplomacy, our soft diplomacy, as it were, as well. What has the commentary been like on the impact of that on India's image in the way, especially with which it dealt with these protests?
So I will say that I think in Norway the commentary hasn't been that big, but I look at the headlines. I also listen to a podcast by The Economist, and I think that in general, when it comes to international news, people are really seeing the stain on Modi's image, which is, I think that's at least what I'm left with. How fast this movement has really been able to shook the current government in India. It's really impressive to really see them having to take action this quickly, or well, this late. But then when they really saw that, wow, these students, they're not going to stop, then they really just decide to sack him. And he also did try to do those fast courts first, but he just saw so quickly that that wasn't going to be enough. That's at least my take. But yeah, internationally, I think that's really what people are left with as well. That the students really did something that hasn't been done before.
Uh, as a member of the Gen Z generation yourself, as I said right at the beginning, we've seen it's not just India, but in other countries also where younger people have taken to the streets protesting. The circumstances may be different in each country. But what is it about your generation that makes you all so different and bold?
That's a good question. I actually think it's definitely more of a thing where it's a generation. This is more of a Gen Z in India right now. I do saw also that in London there were protests supporting the CGP, but I think this is significant because it shows that this particular youth movement in India and the youth of India, they will not just stand for anything, and they're also ready to take the streets. They're ready to take their memes to the street, and they're not just gonna sit and be quiet. I think it's definitely the only thing I can compare it with in Norway is the youth movement when it comes to climate changes. But I that's nothing like what we have seen unfold in India. So um, I will say the Indian youth are definitely winning when it comes to protest and engagement in the streets. Can you, well, the United States too, but that's not really a generational thing.
It's interesting you mentioned the memes because a lot of this battle did play out on social media. And again,
Yeah.
that's, I think, an advantage this generation has. You just can't beat you guys when it comes to your social media game.
No, but I see people are trying, and I also think that's also something so important that the Prime Minister of India also decided that he had to change his entire communication strategy. We don't know how it's going to unfold, but like within just a few days, suddenly you see him having like selfie videos or videos that it looked like he filmed himself by himself, which is I told someone at my office, I was like, I think we all can, like, the first time I saw my own prime minister from a selfie angle on my phone, I was a little bit like, oh, up close and personal. But now I think it must have been even more of a shock from for you guys because Modi is kind of like a larger than life figure for some, and seeing him in a new setting like that and also in a vulnerable stage for India, yeah, I can imagine it was a shock.
Yeah, I mean, one could also argue that reflects that, he's willing to adapt his communication
Yeah.
strategy to what the times demand. And when he realized that this was a very different kind of generation that perhaps would respond differently, the vertical
Well,
videos
he can't
started coming.
afford not to.
Yeah,
He just can't
absolutely.
afford not to because your country has such a young population, so he has to be able to understand the memes. He has to be able to communicate with the youth the way they want to be communicated with. But also what I saw, at least in the comment section, was that a lot of people thought it was too close to first video. And then it's interesting to see or to know, did he see those comments and then adjust so that the next video is more from a little bit further away. But I think it's must be very fascinating as well to work as a political communication advisor for him right now because they really have to try to adapt to the new, well, societal change and the new generation.
I again mentioned in my opening comments the wider debate that this entire protest has sort of started on the role of the mainstream or the traditional media organizations
Yeah.
in India. You have been following that very closely because you came in the crosshairs of Many of the so-called traditional media, plus the IT cell of the BJP, when you questioned Mr. Modi and asked him why he doesn't take questions. What did you think of the fact that so much of the anger of the protesters was sort of directed at the media itself?
Well, it raises such an important question, and that's what type of role the media should have in a democracy. And of course, you and your former colleagues, and also the colleagues that also left NDTV, like you have had to make the ultimate choice, which is a lot of you have been with NDTV for so many years, and then at least from what I've read, a lot of people that left weren't happy with the direction of the company after Adani bought it or bought the majority share. So what I think that more of the youth in India has seen and started to question is, what narratives are we getting? What narratives are our parents being fed? Why don't the media ask these questions about things happening in my life or the lives of the people I know, the lives of my family? Why are, for example, unemployment is super high among educated young Indians? Why aren't the why aren't Indian reporters questioning the prime minister or people in his government about this? Why don't we get answers? So I do think that the protest, yeah, some of the anger was towards members of the media just because it's appropriate. Sadly, I don't like to. I generally really don't like to um, come with a lot of criticism towards media, because I do understand and recognize that there are different ways of doing the job, and I also know that there are very many difficulties with doing a good job. I think the media, no matter which country, we can never get it completely right. But there's so much importance in the struggle of doing so. And I kind of back in May, I kind of fell a little bit into the Goody media, and I wanted to try to answer everyone's critical questions. But then there were specifically two interviews where I just came out of it like completely baffled by the line of questioning. And it's not because I didn't appreciate some of the questions were critical questions that I liked and uh, not would like to respond to. And it's not one of those things where I feel like I have to like each question, but some questions that I don't like are also meaningful. But some of the questions were also just so um not
Loaded.
a part of the topic. Yeah. And one of the comments I got was also so condescending. So there was also like this kind of form of being interviewed, but also being commented on in real life, which was a little bit strange for me to experience. And I
Welcome to our
didn't, yeah, it was crazy. And I didn't say anything about it for a while because I also wanted to think about it and really process it and be like, okay, that experience happened, but was it just me that, or is it just me that are sensitive to this because I was a part of it? Or would I be also critical of it if it happened to someone else? And then I was like, okay, you know what, I would be. So then in July, I was like, okay, you know what? Now I'm going to say a few of my takes on this and throw a few punches at some of the networks.
Well, I saw that. I think to the credit of the independent media, certainly in India,
Yeah.
uh, there are a lot of people who brought us the story of these protests, who are just independent, YouTubers, our own
Yeah.
platform, DeKoder on the ground, etc. So I think, is that again an interesting sort of takeaway from you as someone who's been watching the media here? The fact that good journalism does still exist in India, it just won't
Oh,
exist
yeah.
within the traditional framework that we're used to, right?
Definitely. And it's so both so fascinating to see because there's kind of a lot of different independent media groups. And I think you, as you saw during the protests, at least the ones that I was following, there's kind of Gen Z reporters. So they, although they're doing it from an objective point of view, they're also a kind of in line with the moment, one would say. So there were a lot of Gen Z reporters out and trying to report objectively, but also critically in some instances. But then there's also a lot of independent media, which is basically a bunch of people that have been in that industry for so long, and also having to see it decline firsthand, and said, I'm not going to be a part of that. I'm going to do my own thing, and created new media companies that I hope more Indians will look to, because it's you guys that are really doing the heavy lifting and reporting under difficult circumstances where you also actually jeopardize yourself, either financially or actually also your physical life.
Finally, Helle Lyng, if you had an opportunity actually to ask Mr. Modi a question at an imaginary press conference today, what is the one question you would like to ask him?
Oh, that's a. I answer this a few times, and I think since it's been one of those things where I've talked about press freedom, so I would ask again, why do you not take questions in a press conference setting? And will you at one point in the future do so? That would be, I think I would have to just stick with what I talked about and know. But I think it would be nice to press him on this, because the problem with the interviews that we've seen from Narendra Modi is that they feel scripted. Reporters that know this much better than I do say that they are heavily scripted, say that the journalists are being fed the questions in advance, and some even suggest that the government edits. So the media has basically lost control of all elements of an interview from A to like the in Norway we have something called A to O, because O is our last letter, but yeah, from start to finish. So that's of course something that I think also the Gen Zers are noticing, that the interviews just doesn't make that much sense when you have someone that powerful. And but I
I
also
think,
think that, like,
sorry,
the
no,
most
I
interesting. No,
go
go
ahead,
ahead.
go ahead. I
No,
thought
I
it
think
was
the
really summed up in terms of the impact that, or the sort of international, I think, reportage on these protests. One is just sort of the invincibility of Narendra Modi. The second part of it is also the sort of democratic image that India likes to,
yeah.
present to the world. And on the media itself, I saw a lot of articles in the Western media about the Indian media. But before I let you go, would you concede that there is also in the Western press in particular, a certain lens through which they look at India, which doesn't necessarily capture the complexities of India, and therefore there's a sort of a very sort of preconceived notions about what India is.
Oh, yes, for sure. I think most of us learn about India through our very religious lens. With the I think I've learned much more about India during school from my religion class than I ever did from, for example, a politics class, or of course, we learn about India through history. But I think there's definitely a need for more conversations on India's role in the world right now, and how, like, I also like to, it's a nice way of ending it. Like, India does a lot of good for the world, and also this government is, I would never say that it hasn't accomplished great things, because one doesn't exclude the other. But when it comes to press freedom and also human rights, international organizations and news reports are very clear that there are some serious problems. So, but again, one does not exclude the other. And the world is looking to India for renewable energy and geopolitical safety. And that's also why Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, was here in Norway, because the Nordic leaders really see huge potential in a more stronger cooperation. But to answer your question, yes, I do think that the complexity of India is way too much to grasp for someone that hasn't lived there, and that we have so much to learn about India. You have uh, so many people, so many languages, so many different regions, and a lot of yeah,
Yeah,
uh,
it, it's not
complexity
black and
within.
white. Yeah, absolutely. But Helle Lyng, thank you so much. It was great talking to you today, getting your perspective on this big story as it continues to play out in India. Great to have you on the show. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
That's it on the show this week. We'll be back with much more next week on India and the World. Do join us then.